Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Nate Hastings had been running on pure adrenaline for nearly 24 hours, his mind racing with scenarios after Audra Charles' sudden disappearance sent shockwaves through both their personal and professional circles. And while many in Genoa City assumed she was simply playing one of her vanishing act power games, Nate had an instinct this was different. Too many unanswered calls, no trace on her usual social haunts, and most disturbingly, a cryptic text from her phone earlier that didn't read like her at all. He'd followed a trail of inconsistencies that led him to an industrial stretch of warehouses on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where deals went bad and grudges were settled in shadows. And as he approached one particularly decrepit building, he heard the faintest, muffled cry echoing from inside, spiking his pulse, the sound of chains clinking sealing his certainty that he'd found her, ignoring the logical fear that whoever had taken Audra might still be lurking. Inside, Nate slipped through a side entrance and crept through the dim, dust-choked corridors until he spotted her tied to a chair, wrists raw from struggling, duct tape over her mouth, hair disheveled, eyes wide with both fear and fierce relief the second she saw him. He ripped the tape away, murmuring reassurances as he worked quickly on the knots, but before he could finish freeing her, the sound of footsteps approached from behind, and Nate whirled around, ready to fight, only to freeze at the sight of Kyle Abbott emerging from the shadows, his expression unreadable, his hands raised in a gesture somewhere between surrender and exasperation. "It's not what you think," Kyle began, his voice low but steady, which only made Nate bristle more, demanding to know what the hell he was doing here and whether he had anything to do with Audra's abduction. But Kyle shook his head, stepping closer so his voice wouldn't carry. "I found out who took her. Same people she crossed in France. The ones she didn't tell you about. The ones I've been trying to keep from coming after her and Claire," he admitted, and the weight of those words made Audra snap her gaze toward him, her anger flaring even as she gasped for breath. "You knew they were after me and you didn't say anything," she spat. But Kyle didn't flinch, his jaw tight as he insisted that if he'd gone to Nate too soon, it would have put both Audra and Claire in more danger, that he'd been tracking her location since the moment he realized she'd gone missing, but had to be sure he could lead Nate to her without tipping off their enemies. Nate, still on edge but recognizing the ring of truth in Kyle's tone, finally finished untying Audra, helping her to her feet as she rubbed her sore wrists, though her glare at Kyle was anything but softened. "You think keeping secrets is protecting people?" she demanded, voice shaking from both fear and fury. "That's exactly why I've been telling Claire you're dangerous, because you decide for everyone else what we need to know." And while Kyle absorbed the blow in silence for a moment, he then exhaled sharply, meeting both their eyes as he finally laid out the truth, that the night in France wasn't some meaningless temptation but the moment Audra had been approached by a dangerous intermediary connected to a smuggling ring she'd accidentally tangled with during her Newman Media deals abroad, that she'd downplayed the threat to Nate and Claire, and that when Kyle had tried to get her out of it, the confrontation in the sleeping car had been more about her panicked state and his attempts to calm her down than anything else. But yes, they'd kissed, and yes, he'd been half-dressed because she'd pulled him into the bed to hide when she thought she was being followed. "You left all of that out," Nate accused, his tone thick with a mixture of betrayal and reluctant gratitude, because he couldn't ignore the fact that without Kyle's lead, he might not have found Audra in time. And as Audra processed his version of events, her defensiveness cracked just enough for her to whisper that maybe she hadn't told the whole truth either, that she'd kept the French contact's threats from Nate because she didn't want him to think she couldn't handle herself, and that pride had just about gotten her killed. The tension between them was still palpable, but in that moment, the warehouse became a truce zone out of necessity as Nate urged them both toward the exit, determined to get Audra to safety before whoever had left her here returned. Yet Kyle lingered for a moment at the doorway, scanning the shadows like he expected someone to appear, his mind clearly already spinning through the next moves, because rescuing Audra was only the first step. If those people were willing to snatch her off the streets in Genoa City, they were far from finished, and worse, Claire was now an indirect target. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, police sirens faint in the distance as Nate guided Audra toward his car, promising her medical attention and rest, but she glanced back over her shoulder toward Kyle, torn between the urge to keep hating him and the grudging acknowledgement that he'd put himself at risk to help her, and Kyle, catching her look, gave the smallest of nods as if to say there would be time for anger later. Right now there was only survival. Nate started the engine, the headlights sweeping over Kyle as they pulled away, and for a fleeting moment, Kyle felt the weight of everything: Claire's mistrust, Audra's accusations, Nate's skepticism, but also the faint, dangerous relief of having finally spoken the truth, knowing full well that in Genoa City, truth was never the end of a story, only the beginning of the next war. The ride back into Genoa City was thick with silence. Nate kept his eyes on the road, one hand steady on the wheel while his mind churned. Every so often, he glanced sideways at Audra, who sat rigidly in the passenger seat, arms folded, gaze locked on the blur of streetlights outside. Her hair was still mussed from the ropes, her wrists marked red, but it wasn't the physical state that unsettled him, it was the way her jaw remained tense, as if holding back something far heavier than exhaustion. "You should have told me," Nate said finally, his voice low, more disappointed than angry. Audra didn't look at him. "I had it under control. You were tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse." She flinched slightly at the bluntness but still kept her eyes forward. "I didn't think it would get this far. France was complicated." "That's one word for it," Nate muttered, the image of Kyle emerging from that shadowed hallway still fresh in his mind. He wanted to trust Kyle's explanation, but the idea that so much had been hidden from him by both of them gnawed at him. When they finally pulled into the parking garage under Nate's condo, Audra hesitated before getting out. "You're angry with me." "I'm angry at the situation," he corrected, though the tightness in his tone betrayed him. "And at the fact you were in danger for days without telling me a damn thing." Audra's eyes softened slightly, but only for a moment. "I didn't want you to see me as weak." "Being honest isn't weakness," Nate said. "And the next time something like this happens you tell me, before it's too late." Kyle's long walk home. After Nate and Audra disappeared into the night, Kyle lingered outside the warehouse a little longer, letting the cold wind sting his face as he replayed every decision of the last week. He knew this wouldn't be the end of it. Whoever had taken Audra wouldn't simply vanish into the shadows. They'd regroup, retaliate, and they'd likely aim for the most vulnerable target, Claire. That thought alone had him pulling out his phone. He typed a quick message to her, not expecting a reply. "Need to see you. It's important." No response. Not even the read receipt. With a frustrated sigh, Kyle shoved the phone back into his pocket and started the long walk toward the main road, where he could flag a cab. His mind kept drifting back to the look on Audra's face when she realized he'd known about the danger before she was taken. He hadn't meant to withhold it out of malice, it was strategy, calculated to avoid sending everyone into panic mode. But in this town, "I was protecting you" was just another way of saying I lied. Claire's dilemma. Across town, Claire was curled up on her sofa, laptop open but forgotten on the coffee table. She'd been ignoring Kyle's calls for days, trying to create enough distance to sort through her own feelings. But the truth was, his absence was starting to gnaw at her as much as his presence once had. When her phone buzzed with his message, she stared at it for a long moment before locking the screen without answering. Important to Kyle usually meant trouble, the kind of trouble that pulled her into chaos whether she wanted it or not. And yet, something in the back of her mind whispered that this time felt different. Morning fallout. By sunrise, word of Audra's kidnapping and rescue had started to ripple through Genoa City's rumor mill. Kyle's name wasn't attached to the story yet, but Nate's was. And with that came questions. At Crimson Lights, Sharon poured coffee for an unusually grim Nate. "Heard you had a rough night," she said gently. "You could say that," Nate replied, though he didn't elaborate. Sharon gave him a knowing look. "With Audra involved, I'm guessing rough is an understatement." "Let's just say I learned some things I wasn't prepared for," Nate admitted. He didn't name Kyle, but Sharon caught the flicker in his eyes. "Be careful," she warned. "Secrets have a way of rewriting the truth in this town." Victoria gets involved. It didn't take long for the news to reach Victoria Newman, who summoned Nate to her office that afternoon. She was already tapping her pen against the desk when he arrived. "I heard about Audra," she said without preamble. "And I heard you were the one who found her." Nate hesitated. "That's right. I also heard there was another player in this rescue," Victoria continued, her sharp gaze locking on him. "Kyle Abbott." Nate exhaled slowly. "He was there, Yes. He claims he was tracking her. And you believe him? I believe parts of what he said, Nate replied carefully. But he's still holding back. Victoria leaned back in her chair. Then find out what is holding back. If there's a threat connected to Newman Media, I want it neutralized, yesterday. The truth lands with Claire. That evening, Carl finally showed up at Claire's door, unannounced. She opened it just far enough to lean against the frame. I said I needed space. And I said this was important, Carl countered. Audra was kidnapped. That got her attention. She opened the door wider. What? She's fine now. Nate found her. But I was there too, because I've been tracking the people who took her. Claire crossed her arms. Why? Because they are dangerous, and they are connected to something that happened in France. Something that puts you in danger too. The seriousness in his tone chipped away at her resolve. Start talking. Carl stepped inside and told her everything. The threats in France, the smuggling ring, Audra's role in crossing them, and how he'd kept quiet to avoid drawing attention to her. He even admitted that the infamous sleeping car incident was partly about hiding from pursuers, though he didn't try to sugarcoat the kiss. When he finished, Claire sat in silence for a long moment. So all this time, you've been carrying this around, and you didn't think I deserved to know. I thought keeping you out of it was safer, he said. She shook her head. You still don't get it. Safety isn't about ignorance, Kyle. It's about knowing what you're up against. Nate's private ultimatum. The next day, Nate showed up at Kyle's office without warning. We need to talk. Kyle braced himself. About the warehouse. About the people you've been tracking. I'm not going to pretend I trust you not after the way you've handled this, but if you have intel that could keep Audra safe, you share it with me. No exceptions. Kyle studied him for a moment. And if I don't? Then I'll make sure everyone in this city knows you put people's lives at risk by playing hero, Nate said flatly. Including Claire. It wasn't an idle threat. Kyle knew Nate had the credibility to back it up. Audra's calculations. Meanwhile, Audra sat alone in her apartment, nursing a glass of wine and staring at her phone. She hadn't spoken to Kyle since the rescue. She hadn't even thanked him. Part of her wanted to let the tension fester, use Nate's mistrust to keep Kyle at arm's length. But another part of her knew that Kyle's version of the truth wasn't entirely wrong. If those people came back, she might need his help again. With a frustrated sigh, she typed a short message. We need to talk. The new alliance. When they met later that night in a quiet corner of society, Audra wasted no time. We don't like each other. But I'm not stupid enough to think this is over. If those people come back, they'll come for me first. And maybe you can stop them. Kyle raised an eyebrow. So you want a truce? A temporary one, she clarified. You get me information, I keep you in the loop, and we both make sure Claire and Nate don't get caught in the crossfire. Kyle considered it. Fine. But if you cross me, you'll what? Lecture me about loyalty, she cut in. We're past pretending either of us is a saint. The final scene. 2 nights later, Claire sat alone in her apartment when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. He can't protect you forever. She stared at it, her pulse quickening. Whether it was meant for her or a general threat, one thing was clear: Kyle was right about one thing. The danger wasn't over. And in Genoa City, unfinished business had a way of turning into the next big explosion. The tension in the abandoned warehouse was so thick that even the air felt heavy. Nate Hastings had been following the trail for days, piecing together every scrap of evidence: cell tower pings, eyewitness accounts, a suspicious delivery truck sighting, until the puzzle finally pointed here. The building loomed at the edge of Genoa City's industrial outskirts, shrouded in darkness except for one faint light leaking from a cracked window. His heart pounded in his ears as he moved toward the side entrance, the creak of the rusted metal door echoing in the night. He didn't know what condition Audra Charles would be in after the kidnapping, but the thought of her bound, scared, and alone fueled his determination. Nate wasn't just here as a rescuer. He was here to end the nightmare that had spiraled out of control ever since Kyle Abbott's name became tangled in every messy thread. Inside, the air smelled of oil, damp wood, and something acrid Nate couldn't quite place. He stepped quietly through the shadows, scanning the dimly lit corners. Then he saw her, Audra, sitting on the floor, wrists tied, her usually impeccable hair disheveled, makeup smeared. Relief surged through him so quickly it almost knocked the wind from his lungs. "Audra," he whispered urgently, rushing forward. She lifted her head slowly, eyes wide, a mixture of disbelief and sheer relief flooding her features. "Nate!" Her voice was hoarse, shaky, the single word enough to betray the fear she'd been holding back. Nate knelt, his hands working quickly to untie the ropes. "I've got you. You're safe now," he promised, glancing over his shoulder toward the door as though danger could still barge in at any moment. "We need to get out of here, now." But before they could move, footsteps echoed from deeper in the warehouse. Heavy, purposeful. Nate froze, pulling Audra protectively behind him. A figure emerged from the shadows, the light from a dangling bulb swinging overhead to reveal none other than Kyle Abbott. Audra's breath caught. "Kyle!" Her voice was a whisper of confusion and disbelief. Nate's jaw tightened instantly. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone sharper than steel. Kyle didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, his expression unreadable. "I need to tell you both the truth," he said, his voice low but steady. "Everything you've been told, everything you think you know, it's only part of the story." Nate's grip on Audra's arm tightened protectively. "Truth. You've been at the center of this mess from the start, Abbott. If you've come here to spin another one of your half-baked lies, you can forget it." But Kyle shook his head. "No. No more lies. Not tonight." He looked directly at Audra then, and there was something raw in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or desperation. "I didn't plan this. I didn't want you to get hurt. But I knew who was behind it before it happened, and I didn't stop it." Audra's breath came out in a ragged exhale. "You, what?" Her voice cracked on the word, her mind scrambling to process his confession. Kyle continued, words spilling faster now, as though a dam had finally broken. "I overheard a conversation weeks ago. I knew there were people watching you, waiting for a chance to take you. I should have warned you, but I didn't, because I thought, if they took you, it might force you to finally see the danger you've been walking into." His voice faltered, and his gaze dropped. "I thought I could control the situation, but I was wrong." Nate's fury was instant, surging hot in his veins. "You let this happen." His voice thundered through the empty space. "You let her get dragged out of her life, kidnapped, because you wanted to teach her a lesson." He took a threatening step toward Kyle, fists clenched, but Audra's hand shot out to stop him. She was shaking, her mind reeling, but part of her needed answers more than vengeance in this moment. Kyle's eyes flicked between them. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. They were supposed to keep you safe while they negotiated with me. But something went wrong. Someone else took control, and I couldn't get to you until now." His gaze locked on Audra again, pained. "I'm here because I finally found out where they were keeping you. And because I couldn't let Nate be the only one who saved you." The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Nate's expression was a storm, torn between anger at Kyle's recklessness and grudging acknowledgement that, at least for now, Kyle was telling the truth. "You still haven't told us who they are," Nate pressed, voice low but seething. Kyle's jaw tightened. "It's someone tied to the France trip. Someone who knows what happened in Nice, and wants to use it against me. Against all of us." Audra's stomach twisted. She knew exactly which skeleton Kyle was alluding to, and the thought that her kidnapping might have been retaliation for secrets involving her and Kyle made bile rise in her throat. "You're saying I'm collateral damage in your war?" she snapped, her voice icy. Kyle swallowed hard, his silence speaking volumes. That was enough for Nate. "Then you're coming with us," Nate said, stepping toward Kyle with a determined glare. "You're going to give names, dates, every single detail. Because I swear, Abbott, if you've put her in this position again, I'll make sure you regret it." But before Kyle could respond, another noise cut through the tension. The faint scrape of metal on concrete, coming from the far side of the warehouse. All three turned toward the sound at once, instinctively bracing for more trouble. Nate stepped forward first, but Kyle's arm shot out to hold him back. "Careful," Kyle warned. "If they know we're here, they won't hesitate to finish what they started." The danger was far from over, And the truth Kyle carried could still blow the entire situation wide open. For now, the fragile alliance between Nate and Kyle was the only thing standing between Audra and the shadow still lurking in the darkness.